I'm going to read the
This meeting is being recorded.
I'm going to read the opening statement. This is a special meeting of the Princeton Zoning Board of Adjustment being held electronically via Zoom on June 5th, 2024 at 7:30 p.m. Pursuant to Section 13 of the Open Public Meetings Act, adequate notice of the time and place of this meeting has been given by prominently posted in the Sunshine Notice of the Princeton Zoning Board of Adjustment. Such notice has been placed on the official bulletin board of the Princeton Municipal Complex, and by transmitting a copy of the notice to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Times, Trentonian, and by filing a copy with the Clerk of Princeton on May 28, 2024, and has been posted to the municipal website, www.princetonnj.gov/meetings. Pursuant to Executive Order 107, due to the state of emergency in New Jersey regarding COVID-19 coronavirus, notice that during the declared state of emergency, all regular and special meetings of the Princeton Zoning Board of Adjustment will be held electronically via Zoom, was transmitted to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Times, and was filed with the clerk of the Princeton on the 24th day of April 2020. Such notices have been placed on the official bulletin board of Princeton Municipal Complex and on the Princeton website, and are to be maintained throughout the year, and by transmitting a copy of the same to the Princeton Packet, Town Topics, the Times, Trentonian, Comcast Media, and by filing a copy thereof with the clerk of Princeton. Notices have been placed on the window doors of the municipal complex. Claudia, will you take the roll?
Ms. Chen,
Here.
Ms. Coulson, here. Mr. Floyd,
Here.
Mr. Shriver,
Here.
Mr. Tenenbaum,
Here.
Mr. Cohen, Mr. Stein. George,
You're muted.
Sorry, I'm here.
Ms. Donna. Thank you.
Thank you. I call this meeting of the Zoning Board of Adjustment to order. Before we start with the first hearing, I'd like to propose that we send or pass a memorandum thanking James Davidge for his work at the Zoning Board. Karen, you had a suggestion for what that should be.
Oh, I had a suggestion that the board could adopt a resolution. I can do a draft and I'll circulate it to everyone so that at the June 26th meeting, it could be adopted, commending Jim on his service to the zoning board.
Okay. So we'll do that at the next meeting. Right?
Yes, sir.
Karen, are we in order? Is everything in order for tonight?
We are. We have only one matter on the agenda tonight, and that is the continuing application of Bright Horizons Children's Centers, LLC, doing business as Steve and Kate's Camp. The applicant was not obligated to provide any further notice since we advised at our last hearing that the meeting was being continued. The hearing was being continued to tonight.
Okay, do you want to swear in Derek?
I will, and we also have our planner, Mr. Lesko. So Justin and Derek, do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Derek, do you want to present the case for tonight?
Yeah, I just want to, I'm just going to kind of introduce the case. The applicant is, as requested, submitted some planning testimony, written form, some more information about the camp, and just some reasons to support the application. So I'm not going to repeat what or steal their thunder. Justin Lesko, our planning director, is here as well. I'm happy to let him add anything if he'd like to the application. So.
Sure. Thank you, Derek. And good evening, members of the board and members of the public. Agreed. I don't want to steal the applicant's thunder either. But just briefly, where we left this at 11:45 on the 22nd, was that more information is needed about the camp's proposed operations prior to granting the requested use variance that will run with the land in perpetuity as requested. I would very much prefer to hear facts and figures rather than assurances about those operations so that the board can verify that the uses of the full site works, as well as for the application to meet the proofs to grant the use variance. So based on the depth of that information, and if the board agrees with the applicant's case, then we could discuss to what extent conditions of approval might be necessary.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stonefield, are you representing the client tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Vice Chair.
Oh, I'm
Benjamin Wine,
sorry.
Prime
I'm
and Tuvel, on behalf
Yeah.
of the applicant.
Mr.
I've never
Wine,
got,
before,
Yeah,
Mr.
go
Wine,
ahead.
before you get started, I just want to point out, we have Mr. Tenenbaum. He is a board member. He has represented that he listened to the tape from the last hearing and is eligible to participate and vote tonight. He's having issues with his video. He can see and hear us, but we cannot see him. We can hear him. So just want to make sure, do you have a concern or a problem with the fact that we can't visually see him?
You're
No,
frankly
not at
probably
all.
better off that you can't. I'm really not that handsome.
Listen, I was about to ask if I had the option of turning off my video, but no, I have absolutely no concern with that. I appreciate Mr. Tenenbaum, reading or watching the video and bringing himself up to speed so that he can vote. I want to start, obviously also by recognizing I think the chairman is not present this evening, which unfortunately leaves us with, again, only six voting members. Just to be candid, it's now or never for this application at this point, given that they are seeking to open. So even though we only have 6 members and we need a supermajority of 5 in favor, we are going to proceed this evening. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank the board. I know in addition to your standard duties from a couple of weeks ago, you've all taken the time out of your evenings in order to be here this evening. This is my profession. This is obviously your volunteer work. So thank you very much for doing so. With that, Ms. Casey, if it's okay, what I'd like to do is kind of just reorient the board and then give a brief introduction, I'll say, to what I anticipate to present this evening.
Fine.
So, and for what it's worth, I'm always happy for Mr. Lesko to steal my thunder, but we'll go right ahead. So again, this is an application for minor site plan approval along with a D1 use variance to operate a for-profit day camp located at 650 Great Road that's block 3501, lots 1.01, 2.01, 11, and 12. And that is more commonly known as the Princeton Day School. When we were here a couple of weeks ago, we presented our application. We presented through our engineer, through our operations expert, as well as through our planner, what we intend to utilize the site for, or a small portion of the site for. We discussed our proposed site operations, including the typical hours of operation that we intend to operate, the number of campers, the drop-off and pickup procedures. We went through our planning support for the relief sought. At the conclusion of that hearing, which took place admittedly at a pretty late hour, the board did request that we provide some additional operational materials and a formal planning report to be reviewed ahead of this evening. We did go ahead and granted, and again, I thank the board for the time, but we did manage to pull that together and submit that in satisfaction of the municipal land use law's 10-day requirement. We did get that in about 12 days ago on a Friday. During that last meeting, there were also several comments and questions raised for which we intend to provide additional clarity this evening. Specifically, one of the things we do want to note is that while Princeton Day School themselves is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, which is a federal designation, the property itself is not entirely tax exempt. And just by way of reference, in 2023, PDS did pay approximately $125,000 in taxes for the property. And I want to say this because it's an important distinction, because while they are a nonprofit, they do incur costs at the municipal level. So taking advantage of the opportunity to rent out their facility to help defray some of those costs is something obviously Princeton Day School feels is appropriate and helpful to their operation. More to the point, this is an application to allow parents and children the opportunity to avail themselves of this particular camp experience, one that works in, as you heard, approximately 70 other locations nationwide. And this is a way to do it right close to home in Princeton. As you'll hear, the program is sold out for this summer, evidencing a strong desire of mostly Princeton residents to avail themselves of this particular camp experience. Were there no practical need or desire by the residents of Princeton, the camp would simply not meet its registration goals, and it would have sought to open up elsewhere. As you heard, and as you will hear further, many of the campers that attend Steve and Kate's do so on financial assistance or through the backup care program, paying as little as $20 a day to attend the camp. The fact that the camp itself is for profit just means that those that run the camp earn a wage for doing so. Not only does this not detract from the services provided, but it's our opinion, and we hope you'll agree, that in fact it allows these very operations to operate. If they were not to begin operation in just a few days, approximately 70 kids and their parents would have to scramble to figure out alternative childcare arrangements. This is a service being provided at a seriously important level. I want to also stress that we understand that timing is not a zoning board's concern, being that we plan to open in just a few days, but it is important to note that at its core, this is an application about children, and it's an application about child care at a site that is extremely well suited based on location, school being out of session, and available facilities to exactly such a use. This is not an application by a developer seeking to cram as many dwelling units onto a site that may or may not be suitable for that type of development. And so this brings us to tonight. It's our goal to get the board to feel comfortable approving a small children's day camp in a very small portion of the 75-acre site to be used each summer. However, and I want to point this out as well, while this is certainly not our preference, I'm putting my cards on the table. We're willing to ask for the relief temporarily so that Steve and Kate's can provide its service this summer only, with an agreement to return to the board for permanent relief for future summers, if that's what the board would feel more comfortable with. Again, while this is not our desire, if it helps the board feel comfortable knowing that they will have clear site data from this summer to make a more permanent decision at some point over the course of the next year, we will take this route because, again, we want to do anything in our power to avoid having to tell excited and committed parents and children to scramble to look for alternative childcare in just a few days. With that, I would like to bring two witnesses this evening. I would like to bring up Jess Handebode to discuss more about the operation and answer any more questions the board may have. I know Mr. Lesko has also specifically requested a little bit more operational testimony and more specific, so we certainly will do that. She plans to reorient the board to the vehicular drop-off and pickup plan, financial assistance, coordination with the Princeton Day School, and general programming notes. And then after Ms. Handebode, I will call upon TJ Ricky from Stonefield Engineering and Design to present testimony as to how this use meets the criteria set forth in the Medici case, namely that the site is particularly suited to the proposed Steve and Kate's use and how it advances purposes of the municipal land use law without substantially impairing the zone plan or creating substantial detriment to the public good. And just before I kick back off, I again want to thank the board for hearing our application, and I hope that you ultimately will agree with the testimony we're going to provide and look forward to allowing Steve and Kate's to merge their family with your Princeton family. With that, unless you have any initial questions of me, I'm happy to move straight into my first witness.
Karen, will you swear in these additional?
I will. Ms. Handebode, we need to unmute you. There we go. Do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
I do.
Thank you.
Okay, and Ms. Handebode, you were sworn last time as well, so you've been sworn again this evening. If you could just remind the board who you are, that would be helpful.
Yeah, hi. I'm Jessica Handebode. I am a site operations analyst, so primarily focusing on compliance and licensing at the state level. So working with a lot of lovely New Jersey folks such as yourselves, and making sure that our camps open with all of the I's dotted and T's crossed.
Okay, great. So Jess, let's cut right to the chase here. So I know you went over some of the operations in detail last time, but if you can tell the board exactly what you're looking for in terms of general camper makeup for this summer and then for future summers as well, based on an anticipated growth.
Yeah, so for this summer, as Ben pointed out, we are actually at capacity at this point. So we've never had a site actually open at these numbers. So we're really excited to see that. It shows the need in the community. We're looking about having 80 campers per day. And then in the future, we hope to grow this site to around 150 campers. And now the campers are typically just kind of a nice cross-section of, the community. So the diversity that you see within the Princeton community, you'll be able to see at this camp here at PDS.
Okay, and in terms of staff that will be associated with those 80 campers this year, what are you anticipating, or not anticipating? What do you actually have on payroll?
So we have 15 on payroll, 3 of which are substitute counselors. So for those who might get sick, we've got someone that we can call in to make sure that we've got enough coverage.
Okay, and how would this number grow to accommodate the 150 campers that you have indicated would be an absolute maximum for this site?
So we will always maintain ratio in the state of New Jersey, which is a 7-to-1 ratio for campers who are under the age of 5. We have 4-year-olds at camp. And then a 10-to-1 for anyone over the age of 5. So if we get up to 150, quick math, up to 20, 25 counselors.
Okay, great. I also want to shift over to how your operation, and we'll get to the exhibits shortly, but how your operation would interplay with the Princeton Day School number of campers and staff as well.
Yeah, so we are going to be operating on a different part of their campus, but as it relates to kind of how we are going to integrate in terms of communication, I think that's probably the piece that feels the most significant to me, is we are going to be in constant communication with them. Typically, and we can definitely do this at this site, when there's another camp on a property, we will share walkie-talkies, which kind of sounds silly, but that's how we communicate with, counselors communicate to counselors is via walkie-talkie. We will give a walkie-talkie to that camp director or that administrator of that camp, so that in the event of an emergency or in the event of, anything that they want to tell us, like, we're going to go over there, you won't see us, just wanted to let you know, they can go ahead and let us know over walkie-talkie.
Okay, and this is standard practice. Anytime you operate on somebody else's facility, you have an open line of communication with their operation.
Yes, in particular with the facilities individuals, so the janitorial staff, if you will, or the administrators.
Okay, I think you indicated last time as well that they are projecting on their highest week for signups this summer approximately 230 campers, and you have indicated that this summer you will have 80 at your peak, and in future
Correct.
years you'll have 150. So being
Correct.
that I believe your testimony was also that the Princeton Day School has approximately 900 students on a typical school day when school is in session, I just doing the math, worst case scenario, this entire operation, unless Princeton Day School were to increase their enrollment, would be less than 400 campers on site at the peak time, I'll call it.
That is correct.
Okay, all right. I'm going to move shortly to the exhibit, which I know you entered into last time. So if you can please bring up that circulation exhibit.
Yes, I will. Can you all see it? I think I need to move it a little bit. Is that okay? Can you guys see that?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
fine.
And I
Yes.
believe I'll defer to Miss Casey. This was marked, I believe, as, was it A2 last time?
Yes, I believe so. Correct.
Okay. So Jess, just before you jump into it, can you confirm that this is the exact same exhibit that was marked into evidence at the previous hearing?
It is.
Okay. So again, I know you presented, but just to be clear and concise, can you walk the board through how pickup and drop off would work, both from Stephen Cates and then through your communication with Princeton Day School, how that will work in tandem?
Yeah. So this here on the right, if you guys can see where it says entrance and exit, that is the main entrance point that we will be using, and the other camps as well. It's the main entrance point that the school uses during the school year as well. So any campers who might have attend that school during the school year, they'll be very, very familiar with this. The red arrows indicate what are communal bypasses through the parking lot. Orange indicates where the PDS camp is going to be utilizing their drop off, and green indicates ours. So when a family gets to that first blue dot as they head down these red arrows, that blue dot signifies lovely signs that we've created that will be not permanent, but some sort of heavy duty temporary signs so they won't blow over. Our families are going to turn left down this driveway, which also has parking along the side here. It's kind of hard to see, sorry about that. And And then here in this general vicinity of the, where it says Stephen Cates drop off, there's actually a pedestrian walkway a little further to the north of this. We're gonna have a large tent, that's like a little pop-up tent where we're gonna have computers. It's gonna be very obvious that it's a Stephen Cates Camp family drop-off area. Families are gonna go ahead and pull up. The check-in process takes about, I would say, 2 to 3 minutes on a camper's first day, because it's everyone's first time doing it. After that, it should take upwards of 30 seconds. They're gonna go ahead and get checked in by our staff. They're gonna walk down that pedestrian walkway in tandem with a staff member and maybe a couple of other campers who have just checked in. And they're gonna walk towards our Stephen Cates drop off, which is just beyond this little blue arrow here in what they call, I think it's called the hut, the Pizza Hut, maybe they're just the hut. And so they're gonna go ahead and make sure that they're always with a staff member when doing so. Once our families get to the end of this driveway here, they're gonna see this other blue sign that tells them if they turn left, they can go ahead and exit. At this point, this is where they're gonna meet up with other PDS families who have just dropped off in this main building area. And they're all gonna go ahead and drive out together by those red arrows that you see there.
Okay, and I know you went through the details last time in terms of your hours of drop off and operation as well as Princeton Day Schools. But again, this, just to reiterate, this would be an example of where you would have an open line of communication with the
Correct.
Princeton Day School camp, again, to
Yes.
ensure that there is no conflict with vehicle drop off and there's appropriate staffing both by Stephen Cates as well as by PDS to ensure that this is a smooth operation.
Correct. And with the amount of campers, I did a little research, and with the amount of campers that we're going to be seeing, which is 80, we anticipate that that means that between the hours of 8 and 9, we're going to see about 40 campers dropped off. So that's about, one every minute and a half. Between 9 and 10, it's going to be about 35 to 40 campers as well. So it's pretty evenly split between those two main drop-off hours that we have.
Okay, great. All right. So now shifting gears into the new exhibits that have been submitted. So I'm gonna give you a second to bring that up.
Can you all see this, or maybe I need to like reshare? Or are you guys still seeing?
I think
what are you seeing?
I think you have to reshare. It's some distorted version of the exhibit you just had up.
Oh, how do I get you all back up? Okay, resume share? No, I'm gonna stop sharing and then I'm just gonna come back in here and redo it. Here we go. Now, can you all see it's this document here? Okay, great.
And Jess,
Mr.
can you
Wine,
just
do you
describe?
wanna,
Yeah.
do you wanna mark this or,
Yeah, Ms. Casey, I'll defer to you. These, again, this was submitted
yeah,
10 days in advance. So if it's your practice to mark it, we can do that. If
yeah,
it's-
why don't we make this exhibit A3 and let's see, what would you like to call this? This is
So, I mean, Jess, if you can describe what this document is, and then we can label it.
I would call this a program documentation overview or a written
Okay.
documentation review if you, it says on, maybe just
Okay.
what it says on the top. I think that might be easiest for everybody.
okay.
Written documentation review. Okay. All right. So Jess, if you can go ahead and share what you'd like to share about this exhibit.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I'd like to highlight are just some of the activities that we have, part of our programming, just because it is interesting. We provide, these are just some of the few activities with a bunch of different activities kind of sprinkled in here, but these are the main ones that will occur every day: filmmaking, bakery, sewing and crochet, coding and robotics, outdoor recreation, and then my personal favorite, which is makery, because I just love crafts. And so that's kind of a fun thing to take a look at. As we go further down, this talks a little bit more about those hours of care. So we're open from 8 to 6. We're open Monday through Friday, except for the 4th of July. Drop off and pick up, as we described before, it typically will take place from 8 to 10 is kind of the window in which we have those computers available at the curb, with most families arriving between that 8:30 to 9:30, sprinkled evenly throughout there.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah,
May I?
sure.
How many weeks are you going to be open?
So this site would be open for 10 weeks this summer. It would
Thank you.
change summer to summer potentially if the school calendar changes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So site usage, as I showed you guys on the map, we're using those middle school buildings. This is the cost of the camp per day, unless a family were to apply for financial aid or have a different kind of, what do we call the giving back, a different way that they're receiving that care. I just touched upon the age a little bit, average attendance for this summer with hoping to get up to 150 in future summers. In our last call, there was some question about, sorry, where we had done some marketing. So I went ahead and asked our marketing team and they gave me the exact zip codes that they mailed things to. These zip codes mean a lot more to you guys than they do to me. But wanted to give you guys that list because I know that was a question that we had last time we were all meeting. And then this is the part that I really wanted to highlight for you all is just what we call our giving back. There are 4 distinct ways in which we give back annually. So this isn't a one-time thing. This happens every year for every single campsite. We have financial aid, backup care, what we call Oz days, and scholarship days to schools. I will just give a little brief overview of each one if that is okay with you, Ben.
Please.
So financial aid is a program that we offer for families, and it's based on, and I'm going to read this exact thing from my coworker because she gave me the exact actual numbers here before we joined this meeting. So it's financial aid that anyone is able to apply for. We have approved 86% of the people who have applied for financial aid this year across our company. And the income limits are based on family size. So if you're a family of 2 earning less than $101,000 annually, a family of 3 less than 113, a family of 4 at 124, or a family of 5 at 137. Obviously those, if there's more kids and more things happening, those numbers would adjust a little bit. But 86% of our people who applied actually did get the financial aid. For this site, we had 4 families who applied and 4 families who were approved. So we were approved 100% of financial aid for this campsite. The financial aid rate is $92 a day. So at the original rate of $122, that's a $30 difference per day. The rate actually includes all of the hours that were open. So a family can drop off right at 8, pick up right at 6. It includes all of the materials and it includes all the food that their campers may eat for the day. The next thing would be our backup care. So because we are an entity of Bright Horizons, we automatically participate in backup care. This is a subsidized benefit for families through their employer. So the benefit of this, which I think is pretty amazing, is that it's only $20 per day for that family. So a family might not be able to typically afford a program like ours, but through their employer, they can get this very reduced cost, and they actually get 20 days per year that they can use this across our summer times, across our winter breaks, spring breaks, however you may use it. Some of the companies that Bright Horizons gave us that are signed up for our camp are Princeton University uses backup care, Johnson & Johnson, Bloomberg, and then there were 36 other local employers who use backup care who are signed up for our program. Oz days is kind of just days of camp that we give away and typically to local charities. So we did 98 days of camp via the Bright Horizons Foundation. And the charities are typically anonymous just to protect the privacy of the individuals. And then last but not least is our scholarship days. So with our lease with PBS, we actually have given them 275 days that they can use at their discretion to give to students of theirs. And they have confirmed with me that they're giving it to their, giving it to the highest families of need that they have that attend their school. And then this is just a little blurb about how that whole process of site acquisition worked for us and how we typically find partners.
Thanks, Jess. And then I'd like to shift to one more avenue. So if you can confirm, there was a lot of conversation about what makes Stephen Cates unique, but also that if the variance were to be granted, I apologize, I forget which board member had brought it up, but there was a question about, well, how do we ensure that, if we approve this, 2 years from now, there isn't a camp, even Stephen Cates, that operates with 600 campers at any time. So my question to you is, having given the operational testimony and made it clear on the record that this site, you have no anticipation will exceed 150 campers at its maximum, would you be comfortable that if anything were to change in terms of exceeding that number of campers, in terms of changing your hours of operation, becoming a sleepaway camp, which I doubt is going to happen, but anything that changes from your specific operations may result in a requirement that you return to this board and either represent or present some type of amended application?
I understand, and we have no intention of changing any of the above that you mentioned.
Okay. And just to be clear, to close the loop on that question, you have discussed that with Princeton Day School, and they're also aware that that is, that would be likely, and I shouldn't be presumptuous, but likely made a condition of any approval this evening.
We have not specifically said that to PDS, but we most certainly can.
Okay, I think I believe Ms. Gibson had testified last time that her understanding is, again, it's only for these types of operations. So that's fair. That might be for somebody else. Okay. And really lastly, Jess, again, in terms of committing to the operations, I think Mr. Lesko had raised the concern. I just want to reiterate, you would have a constant open line of communication with Princeton Day School maintenance, as well as their operations on site, to ensure that anything, emergency, standard operating procedure, if somebody, additional is going to be there, like a vendor that you wouldn't otherwise anticipate, there will be an open line of communication with PDS at all times.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. All right. So Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, that's really all I sought to elicit from Ms. Handebode, but she's certainly available for your examination.
Thank you. Who's next?
I have some questions, Steve, before you charge on.
Well, I was going to let them go through all their testimony first and then have questions, but go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, somehow you managed to ask a question earlier.
Well, I snuck it in there.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be a little more formal because it is about marketing and whatnot. And Mr. Wine had asked when he finished if there were questions, and I think the first two speakers are related, so thanks.
That's fine.
I just an observation. I'll start with on the 9 zip codes you have, which is neither here nor there. I believe only 2 of them are actually Princeton zip codes. I know we talked about that around that before, but anyway, your program, reading all the materials the last 2 meetings now, is interesting and seems a very good program. You mentioned that you're 100% subscribed for the 80 spots. I was trying to understand how you operate. It read like you sign people up and they don't have to use all the days. At the end, you may refund their monies. Is that correct? That's correct?
Yes.
So how many of those 80 do you think you will average per day?
So 80 is the average. So I don't know the exact amount of people who are registered. I can get that number right now if you want to know the exact number. But the average is going to be 80 per day. So there might be some days where we've got 50, July 5th, we'll probably have 15 because it's a Friday. But then on, a different day, maybe on Monday, we might have those 80 campers. Now, with the cap of 80, we will cap it so that we can make sure that we're in ratio with those kids. So in the event that someone does show up, we have to figure out another care for them. And so that's the beauty of backup care, is that we can help them find something else to do that day. So we can do that. And we have several of our sites that have capacities like that set up where we can figure out what we're gonna do.
Okay, yeah, it's good. I just
Mhm.
wanted to understand if you were implying 80 every day, all the 43 or 45 days
Right.
of a season. That's not the case.
Yeah,
but-
yeah,
but
so,
I-
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, but I do understand you got the numbers that you hope to get. I gather, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
just wanted to reiterate and because I don't think I mentioned it before, and it actually isn't written here, so maybe a good thank you for bringing up the refund policy, because that is
Yeah,
something that I think is really beneficial to the community financially as well. So if you sign up for camp, I don't know if I've said this out loud before, if you sign up for camp and you think you're going to come for 2 weeks and maybe you've decided that maybe it's not for you, or you'd rather go to your lake house for the weekend, or you'd rather go somewhere else or not for the weekend, sorry, for a Friday, you will always get your money back, guaranteed, no ifs, ands, or buts. And you can actually get your money back instantly now. Parents can request it on their own and get their check sent to them that next week. So that's an exciting thing for us financially for families.
yeah. And you might choose to go back to the camp you used last year.
Correct.
Yeah. So I gather Mr. Stein last week had asked if you could not produce, if you had a market study. I gather since you finished your testimony now, you don't have a market study regarding, potential need and competition and stuff like that, or you would have presented it.
So there are several other camps in the area. Some of them have activities such as ours, some of them don't. I didn't include it in here because it didn't feel like the research we yielded was all that significant, to be honest.
Okay.
It felt like there were some comparable camps in the area, which is one of the reasons why our site acquisition team tends to flag cities that that city looks great, because there's opportunity in the area and looks like the community does need the care.
I would like to make a comment, if I might. Responding in part to the question of a market study and the issue raised initially last week by Michael Sloyd. If it's to be deemed inherently beneficial, it really doesn't depend on the market. And in fact, when that nursing home went out of business, that was clearly inherently beneficial, but its financial condition was not the concern. And would not be the concern in this case if we decide to grant the variance on the basis of inherent beneficial.
And Mr. Stein, if I may, that's a very astute point. I think you'll hear from our planner momentarily, who is going to dive, I think, more into your standard Medici criteria. Letting the record reflect the inherently beneficial testimony that is on there, but it's almost the opposite avenue to achieving the variance request.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go into that myself, so I look forward to it later. I think your program looks good to me. I don't think that you hit your numbers means that there is absolutely, certainly that proves there's a market. It could prove how good your program looks to people, and they've signed up with you versus someone else. So at this point, I don't know that whole market question, that it's not proven that serves a need, which I think you said in the earlier part. But I was prepared to, ask about that. I think related to the numbers, that's all the questions I have, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Ryan, you want to continue?
Sure, absolutely. So Jess, if you don't mind taking your screen down, perfect. So with that, my next and final witness I intend to call this evening is TJ Ricky, our planner from Stonefield. So TJ, I bet Miss
Ricky,
Casey's going to
do
get
you-
you sworn in.
Yes, do you swear or affirm your testimony this evening will be truthful?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
TJ, since you were not here at the last meeting and your colleague, Mr. Martell, covered, I'm going to ask you to please proffer your educational and professional background and your experience and the status of your license in the state of New Jersey as a professional planner.
Yes, absolutely. For the record, TJ Ricci, RICCI, business address is 92 Park Ave, Rutherford, New Jersey. I'm a project manager at Stonefield Engineering and Design. I received my Bachelor of Arts degree from Rutgers University, as well as my master's degree in city and regional planning, also from Rutgers University. I'm a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. I am certified by the American Institute of Certified Planners. I have been accepted by well over 80 land use boards throughout the state of New Jersey. All of my licenses and certifications are active and in good standing.
Have you testified before this board before?
I have not.
Okay, we accept you as a certified planner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So TJ, you had the benefit of reviewing the last meeting on Zoom to watch the video, hearing all that testimony, hearing the testimony here this evening from Ms. Handebode, and also reviewing the reports that have come in related to this project. So I'm going to turn it over to you now to walk the board through your planning proofs for the D1 use variance being sought.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, so I obviously viewed the recording of the last hearing. It was mentioned that the board requested some additional planning related documentation. So me and along with my colleague, Jeffrey Martell, at the board's request, prepared and submitted the planning report, just so the board can have a little bit more on the planning side of things to help clarify how we meet this statutory criteria for the use variance. So the bulk of my testimony will really be related to the report and the planning proofs, and then how my professional opinion, I think we meet that statutory criteria. If you notice in the report, we put in the planning proofs under both the SECA analysis for inherently beneficial uses, as well as the standard Medici test, which is for non-inherently beneficial use variance cases. We did that because that was a conservative approach by us to basically offer up the board consideration of both criteria. I understand that during the previous hearing, my colleague had testified to the SECA balancing test, which would indeed require the board to classify the camp as an inherently beneficial use. I'm aware that the board had some reservations about it. I would tend to agree because camps, by state statute, haven't been deemed inherently beneficial. There's no court cases or legal precedent that I'm aware of that declares them as inherently beneficial. So in my opinion, I think the conservative approach, and I would agree with the board on this, is where we revert back to Medici. So that's really the standard that I'm going to be utilizing tonight to justify the D1 use variance. I had the pleasure of speaking with Mr. Lesko prior to the hearing, the township planner. It was good that he made time to speak with us, given the time constraints of this application. I think we were both in agreement. The Medici standard was the most conservative approach in this application. So without being presumptuous, I think we were on the same page with that. So that being said, I'm sure the board is familiar. The positive criteria for the Medici standard is satisfied by the demonstration of two things. Number one, that the site is particularly suitable for the proposed use. And number two, that special reasons exist because the project advances one or more of the purposes of the municipal land use law. So starting with particular suitability, I think there's a couple of reasons that we can demonstrate site suitability for the camp. First and foremost, the site is already developed as a school.
I think that this is a property that's well suited for a camp because we have all the facilities already existing that are necessary to properly run a summer camp. As Ben had mentioned in the last hearing, there are no site improvements proposed because they're not needed, because everything's here is perfectly set up for Steve and Kate's camp. I think also from a safety standpoint too, you have a property that was designed specifically with children in mind. We have school buildings that already exist, drop-off and pickup loops, pedestrian paths that connect those loops with the buildings. You have the recreational fields. I think all of that, the fact that this already exists as a facility or a property that serves children, I think makes it a perfectly suitable use for summer camp to operate because they utilize those same facilities in a similar fashion that a school does. And then I think secondly, for site suitability, summer camps can be, this is a site that essentially makes itself available when the summer camp needs it. So the municipal land use law, it talks about the efficient use of land, which is purpose M. That can be interpreted to mean a variety of things, but I think in this particular application, we have a summer camp that essentially needs the property only for 3 months. And then the other use is a school that needs it for the other 9 months. They conveniently, the timeframes line up perfectly. So I think the point I'm trying to make is we arrive to the particular suitability of the site because this property can be utilized year round. In planning, it's good planning practice to share usage of land such as this, such as school and then summer camp when it's not being used. Planners usually promote a shared parking scenario. That's not what we're doing here, but the shared parking space when one use uses it and it doesn't need it anymore, and then another use comes in and utilizes that. That's a good planning principle because it means we're not overusing land or resources somewhere else if resources already exist and are available to us. And that resource is the existing Princeton Day School and its existing facilities, which are currently unused in this area during the summer. So that discussion leads me into the special reasons criteria, which I think I already kind of talked about, and I think Jess already hit on it too, the benefits of the use. But I think the project as a whole furthers more than one purpose of the municipal land use law. I always like to start with purpose A, which is to encourage municipal action to guide the appropriate use or development of all lands in the state in a manner which promotes public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. I think we promote all 4 components of that goal: public health, safety, morals, and general welfare. As it was mentioned in the previous hearing by both Jess and my colleague, Mr. Martell, there's numerous benefits to this use. I think first and foremost is for the children who receive the benefits of going to this summer camp, especially one like Steve and Kate's. There's, of course, the recreational component. Kids are outside, physical activity, staying active during the summer. There's the social benefits of interacting with other children outside of the school year. And then I think lastly, as we acknowledge, to some degree, the learning or educational component of this. We're not elevating ourselves to the level of, say, a school, but I think there is, in this particular application, some degree of learning and teaching and educational enrichment that children will be provided, outside of the school year. And then I think there's the broader value of this use that serves the general welfare. And that's, of course, because it provides a service to parents and families in the immediate area. I'm almost positive that the majority of parents are in need of some sort of childcare when the children are not going to school. Unlike school year, adults, we have to work year round. We don't get summer vacation. So parents still need to go to work. send their kids somewhere. I think this provides a valuable and necessary service that a lot of communities have. So I think that's the general welfare piece of this application. Additionally, I think we align with purpose M, and that talks about the efficient use of land. As I mentioned in my site suitability discussion, I see this as a perfect fit. I see these two being, the times of the year in which they need to use the property, I think conveniently, obviously line up summer camp and school. So I think that's a perfect, efficient use of land, especially when this is a resource that's already built and available and existing. Two other reasons, purpose C. Purpose C talks about adequate light, air, and open space. The camp is going to utilize several existing acres of open space for children to enjoy and receive the benefits of the physical activity of the land. And then lastly, purpose G. Purpose G talks about providing sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of uses, one of which is recreational, in order to meet the needs of New Jersey citizens. I think in Ms. Handebode's testimony tonight has determined there's obviously a need. This is meeting the needs of New Jersey citizens. When we talk about providing sufficient space in appropriate locations, I think a school property is a perfect location for this because, just like school operations are typically located from a convenience standpoint in residential neighborhoods. So I do find that the summer camp would operate in a similar fashion, and that's why it's an appropriate location at this site. So to sum up, I think that's a clear demonstration of the site suitability and the special reasons criteria for approval under the Medici standard, which is, why I'm happy to move on to the negative criteria standpoint. With regards to the impact to the public good, the way I see it, the proposed use of a summer camp will operate, I would call this functionally similar or even identical to a non-for-profit camp from a land use perspective, right? So from a land use standpoint, I don't see any differences in the operations of the two types of camps. I would say that it would even be less intense than a school because as it was mentioned, we have far less children that are normally accommodated on this site during a normal school year. So the way that I like to think about this or evaluate it is, if people were driving by and looking, driving past, seeing the camp operations, would there be a noticeable distinction between a profit camp and a nonprofit camp? And I just personally don't see that a distinction could be made, which is good from an impact standpoint, because I just think these are just operating very, very similarly. With regards to the second prong of the negative criteria and the discussion of where this fits in with the zone plan, specifically the E4 educational district zoning, we fully recognize that for-profit camps are not permitted. But I don't particularly think that the benefits derived from the proposed use from Stephen Cates camp are lost when you have a for-profit camp as compared to a non-for-profit camp. Point being is I think both hold similar benefits in the value that they provide from a land use standpoint, from a land use perspective. And as I mentioned, I don't see the intensity being significantly higher or different than some of the other permitted uses in the area. Therefore, I don't see this going against what the zone plan envisioned for this site. I know that there was a discussion on, I think the question we always ask is then, if we're going to make that argument, then why wasn't this permitted? Candidly, we aren't sure of the answer. But I'll say in land use planning, it's rare that you have a distinction. I guess we'll call this a fiscal operational distinction between two land uses that operate in a similar fashion. We normally don't get into that type of I guess, criteria when evaluating land use intensity standpoint. If I were to guess, I would imagine that the governing body maybe didn't want to permit commercial camps in, being hesitant that these larger private businesses would grow to a point that crosses some sort of threshold, where now the site wouldn't be able to appropriately accommodate that site. They don't want it to balloon or to grow into something that they wouldn't be able to control anymore. But that's not what we're doing here. I think it was testified to. There's the coordination with the Princeton Day School, the pickup and drop-off operations, the security, most importantly, the maximum number of campers to be on this site and how the site can accommodate it, particularly because I think there's going to be probably around half the students in the summer than what the normal school accommodates. So that's what I see could have been the intent of the governing body. As I mentioned, there's no way to totally know, but this is not a use that's going uncontrolled. I think we'd offered up reasonable conditions, which is why I think it doesn't go against the zone plan, and I think it's compatible with the other permitted uses as well as the surrounding uses. With regards to the master plan, I definitely think that this project is aligned with some of the goals in there. One of which is to provide, is to meet the active and passive recreation needs. I think we're doing a part of that by providing active recreational needs for children. And then another goal was specifically in the educational facility recommendations. I believe my colleague had testified to this goal too, but I'll just briefly reiterate, it was to maximize utilization of existing facilities and land. And that was under the educational facilities section. And I think that's exactly, we're hitting that spot on. I think that's exactly what we're doing here. We have an existing school and we're essentially using it and fulfilling a need for children in the area. All right, so to sum up, I think logically speaking, when we're weighing the pros and cons of this application, I think what we have here is a section of an already developed school that serves children that's currently not being utilized in the summer. We have an applicant that wants to utilize that space in a very similar way of some of the other permitted uses, and in a similar way that shows there's a definite need in the community for this use. So I think it's a perfect utilization of this existing resource. I think it serves the Princeton community. It definitely serves a need. It serves the children that are going to be going here. It helps out the parents find, childcare or someone to watch their child while they're at work. I think this is one of those applications, candidly, this is a win-win for everybody, for the community, from a planning standpoint, from a land use standpoint. I think that this is a project that would hopefully realize the full potential of the site and essentially maximize the greatest benefits to the children, which is providing them school and camp in a year-round fashion, right? They can utilize these resources and learn and be active year-round. And I think it's going to serve the community and the families in the immediate area as a whole. And I think those are the special reasons why we can approve this under the Medici standard. That concludes my direct, but I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, TJ, I was just going to ask one follow-up, and thank you. I know that was extremely thorough. Would it be your opinion as a professional planner? I know you basically said that you don't feel there are really any substantial detriments or any impairments to the zone plan, but nevertheless, would it be your opinion that the numerous benefits that you have enumerated here this evening would substantially outweigh any detriments to the extent that the board feels there may be some?
Yes, I do think so.
Okay, so Mr. Vice Chair, that concludes my direct examination of Mr. Ricci.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Ricci? Michael, you're muted.
Mr. Ricci, let me go to the bottom line. Since there's a lot of schools in Princeton, do you think the current zoning restriction that is in place and applicable here is basically a part of the zoning code that should be changed?
So do I think the provision to not permit for-profit
Or-
camps should be
Yeah.
removed?
Yes.
From a land use planning perspective, I don't see that being an issue because I see the potential impacts being the same. But as we mentioned, we testified doesn't meet the standard with this particular application to Stephen Cates Camp. I can't say that the private, other private camps, we would feel the same way, but I would say generally speaking, yes, I believe that it could be removed because I don't see any impacts.
Yeah, and maybe to the more operational marketing person, but if you want to tackle this too, how many schools in Princeton did you look at, if more than PDS?
I am not sure. I can ask a colleague right now and hopefully get an answer for you in just a few moments, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah.
Pausing on that. Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
that'd be fine. And then lastly, Mr. Chairman, I would defer any more questions myself to Justin Lesko, our planner, who I know was waiting for the presentation and of course the memo that was submitted a few days ago. So I'll defer any other questions I have.
Okay, let's hold a minute and see if there are any other questions for Mr. Ritchie. Any other questions?
I guess I was
Okay.
thorough enough.
I then, I'll finish my questions if that's what you want to do. I think
Sure.
one will be a statement on site suitability. Credit is, you said light air, open space, and also open space as things that are positive land use purposes. I don't see you taking credit for something you didn't create. It's not like, it exists, it's there. So I just think that's a stretch to then want credit for that. I think the other health, safety, morals, so be it. But those were the two I take issue with.
Okay, Michael, you have questions for Mr. Lesko?
I'm hoping Mr. Lesko now after this presentation has questions for the planner to planner questions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
that would also give the board members,
Oh, that's fine.
additional perspective, not just one side.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Floyd and Mr. Chair. So the first thing, it's not a question, but the E4 zoning does not allow a camp, a nonprofit camp. Just to be clear about that, because I think there's been some miscommunication. It allows for a school that's not for profit, the educational activities of that school, and that's how Princeton Day School does what they do in the summer. But it's really not a question of, well, this is nonprofit, this is for profit, but otherwise a camp's a camp. The kids are running around, it is what it is. That's not necessarily the case. And so I just wanted to kind of go back to the impacts, the benefits to the community. I know there has been some extensive discussion, or maybe not extensive, but some discussion about there not being a market study thus far. There's obviously a reason that that Stephen Cates Camp picked Princeton, picked this school. Then we see the zip codes and it goes further than just Princeton, you know, not surprisingly. I guess my question is what makes this site desirable, and then what makes this site unique among those zip codes, you know, to benefit our community.
I guess the question is what makes it unique compared to other properties in some of the other zip codes that were looked at when trying to locate this camp?
Yeah, I mean, normally what we ask, or at least there's often a discussion of, well, did you look in other zones in our town? Is that use allowed? We know for the most part it's not. There's a conditional use standard for the nonprofit that has come up, if it's a nonprofit camp, but generally speaking, there's not. Essentially, it would just be Princeton University here with a nonprofit. And I know I'm getting into the weeds now, and I apologize for that, unless the board wants me to. But the bigger question of, is the board going to grant a use variance from our ordinance to serve the children of Montgomery, of Lawrence, of other municipalities? Or how do we know, or to what extent do we know that this is serving our community if it was granted?
So I mean,
Yeah, I
sorry.
think I think it's more of a question for Jess to
Yeah,
answer
I
who
mean,
it's serving directly.
yeah, we certainly do have registrants from other communities. And so, you know, we're going to be operating at PDS would be the hope, right? And then with the understanding that we're serving the greater Princeton community at large. There are a lot of people who live in the nearby communities or nearby suburbs who might work in Princeton. So this feeds a need for them to have their camper go to camp in the summer that's nice and close to where they work. And so a lot of people I know are commuters who would be coming in. So we would be serving the larger Princeton community. Is it okay if I address your previous question as it relates to like why PDS would be appealing?
Please.
I don't have my answer quite yet of like how many schools we reached out to. It's a little late for some folks, and I know everybody's got, not everybody, but a lot of people have kids, and so I'm sure they're busy with their children at the moment. Hopefully I get an answer soon. As it relates to PDS, when we're looking at properties, one of the things that's really enticing to us is a large property where the layout is very, for lack of a better term, like very simple. It's like, this is where you drop off, you walk right here, this is where the classrooms are. There's not a ton of stairs up to different gymnasiums, or there's not like hidden cafeterias around weird corridors. And so this school, when it came across, when I look at this map, as someone who ran Stephen Cates camps for 13, 14 years, it is very appealing how simple it is, and how large the property is. There's dozens and dozens of camps that we operate where we share the campus with another camp. And a lot of those campuses are a lot smaller than this one. So when an opportunity comes up for a large school, they have a base already that exists not only during the school year, but they have that base in the summertime as well. And we know that their camp is going to be located, 40 acres that way, and we're going to be located on this side of the property. So in terms of operational, it is quite enticing to us.
Thank you. And my next question, and is not necessarily just for Mr. Ricci, I guess for whoever can answer it, but I'm kind of beating a dead horse at this point of, so we've heard a lot about how the two camps combined are less of an impact than Princeton Day School the other 9 months of the year. How do we know that? Does Princeton Day School drop off by school buses, or do they have X number of cars coming in? Do their cars usually, are they split up by elementary school, middle, and high school? So it's spread out versus how will things work at this camp? I know it was mentioned earlier, the potential for temporary relief just for this summer, until we have that information. And I guess my message to the board, if we don't have that information, is you may want to examine that temporary relief in order to allow the applicant to come back next year with more information.
If I may, I cannot speak to the drop-off procedures of the school at this point, but we do have a school administrator here who might be able to speak to that in a moment. I think for us, where we say that there's a relief in terms of the drop-off and pickup procedures is that we don't have a set, you have to be here at this time. As opposed to the school year where school starts at whatever, 8:15 and everyone has to be there by 8:15. Which is the typical school, right? Maybe we can hear from Delaney in a little bit if that's how their operations work. If they don't, then I will be corrected. But for camps, we don't have that set, you have to be here now. And so we don't have that influx of all 80 kids being dropped off at one time. It's the 2-hour slow trickle of people coming in. And then at the end of the day, we typically see that between 4 and 6 is that slow trickle out for the day.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Which makes sense for this camp based on everything we've heard. But again, not knowing, I think it was stated today, 230 Princeton Day School campers are normally there. I've resorted to going on their website to try to figure out what goes on there, and then try to parse that out. And like I said last time, I'm not a traffic engineer. So, I don't know or don't have the knowledge of being able to tell if, the car's queuing is going to present an issue based on their normal drop off and pickup times. It mentions online something like up to 20 kids per session that they have there. And then I counted it last time, something like 10 full day sessions, 17 half day, 12 half day PM. So if that person could provide more information, it very well might be a quarter or less than the rest of the year impact. I just can't say for certain now. And I certainly wouldn't want to put myself or the board in a position to have an issue down the line and, have the public thinking, well, who approved this? As sometimes happens. So that's why I continue to bring it up.
And Mr. Lesko, if I may, and we could certainly have, Ms. Gibson from the school, answer if there's further questions. But I think, again, the testimony that we were given by the school, the raw data is that their weeks for their camp session will have as few as 130 campers and as most as 230. So that's the data that we have been given directly by PDS. So, I think that's what we can rely on, A. And B, you did hear from our traffic engineer last time, as well as again from Jess this evening, that I think the way the drop off and pickup is set up with that, I usually speak in terms of dual lane drive-throughs because I represent a lot of Popeyes and McDonald's restaurants, but that dual lane approach, whether it's one camp there, 2 camps there, multiple uses, whatever the case, that's a built-in safety net and help to ensure that with the right signage, you go this way, you go that way, and there shouldn't be a conflict. Obviously, I think that diagram showed that the potential queuing area, so to speak, all the way back to Great Road is obviously significant. I mean, it's very well set back. And again, whether even on a max capacity, if it's 230 kids at PDS plus 80 kids here at Stephen Cates, I think the testimony that you've heard from Jess that it's 1 car for roughly per every minute and a half for the Stephen Cates use is not going to add significantly to whatever the PDS operation might look like.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, may I ask Mr. Bridger a question, please? It's Harlan Tenenbaum speaking.
Yes, you may.
Mr. Bridger, is there a precedent within town of for-profit organizations renting their facilities to nonprofit organizations?
For-profit to nonprofit or nonprofit to for-profit?
Sorry, vice versa, nonprofit to for-profit. Excuse me. Thank you for correcting me. Nonprofit to for-profit.
I'm not sure. I know a lot of there's nursery schools that have had daycare centers forever, but I'm not really sure if they're for-profit or nonprofit. They've been here prior to my tenure at Princeton. So I don't know of a lot of instances, if any. Right
What
off.
about the YMCA and the reference we had in memo?
At the what? In the,
There was a reference I read somewhere to the YMCA and YWCA.
well, that's under the conditional use criteria. That's where it permits not-for-profit camps, and that was one of the examples, such as those run by the YMCA, YWCA, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. So, I mean, I'm sure it may happen. There could be a karate camp that has some agreement with the Y, but it's never risen to the zoning level. So I cannot, provide an accurate answer on that.
Michael, you have another question?
First, something related to this subject, it's far removed or much bigger. Probably the biggest local case in Princeton 10 years ago or so was Lewis versus Princeton University, which resulted in the university paying a over time $18 million additional. The town wasn't involved. It was about a nonprofit, obviously big institution, having for-profit operations within part of its campus, of making big money. I realize this is a whole different thing, but why that, that question from Harlan came up. Well, that was the biggest case, land use.
Correct. I mean, that was
Michael.
pharmaceutical companies and research and the relationships between
AI and
going to outside income from drug companies or artificial intelligence companies. I mean, Justin and I talked about this too. We were trying to figure out why would the town have this requirement. I think Michael might have had some, a good idea at the last meeting. Maybe these are nonprofit uses in general. However, the university pays, they have an agreement. They pay $1 million a year in taxes. This school pays $125,000 in taxes. I mean, we look at hospitals, they're nonprofit, but I see they're run by very powerful corporations that are making money. So it's a fine line to divine, it gets complicated. This is
if I may, I think that's why Mr. Ricci also put on the testimony that as a matter of land use, there's not a practical difference. If you drive by and see this camp, or if you sign your kids up for the camp, there's no way to know without looking at their corporate structure, whether it's for profit or nonprofit from the outside looking in, from a land use perspective.
Speaking of corporate structure, and anyway, we've talked about Stephen Cates and that being the operator, but of course the applicant is Bright Horizons. Could you explain who and how big is Bright Horizons?
It's a LLC that it started in Massachusetts. How big? The only thing I can say for 100% certainty is how many employees there are, and maybe that gives you guys a little bit of an example.
It's publicly traded, right?
It is, yeah.
It's international, correct?
It is, yeah. We're in, I think it's Great Britain.
Netherlands.
The Netherlands. So
Canada.
I'll give you guys a little bit of a background. So Stephen Cates started in 1980 in a suburb of San Francisco, was owned by Stephen Cate up until COVID. COVID hit, and in order to survive, we had to be bought out. And so Bright Horizons became our parent company at that point.
Okay, so I thank you for sharing that, and Michael, thank you for the line of questioning that seems to show that this is a rather large multinational corporation. This is a subsidiary of a large multinational corporation looking to establish a foothold here in Princeton. It seems like we're repeating a lot of the same things, and my immediate concern is the 70 families that may not have childcare starting next week. So if Mr. Wine has put this forward, and Mr. Chairman, I don't know if now is the appropriate time or not. If it warrants additional discussion of other topics, then please don't allow me to curtail that conversation. If it makes more sense for us to not penalize the families and allow this camp to operate for this summer and then address the larger issues at a further time, I'm amenable to that. Clearly, there are some issues here. Clearly, we're kind of under a gun in terms of making a decision. Ideally, I'd like to be able to do what's best for those kids and those families that are our neighbors, and not have them have to scramble at the last minute to find childcare. So again, I don't mean to jump ahead or be out of line, Mr. Chair, but what are your thoughts, Mr. Chairman, of allowing us to proceed with putting forth?
I think that's a perfectly reasonable suggestion, but I'd like to wait for it until we get to the executive session and then talk about it then.
Okay, thank you.
In executive session, we can still ask questions of the expert witnesses. So why don't we proceed with any questions we have for these folks and then go to the public and then go into executive session and talk about that. So that's okay with you, Harlan?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So any other questions for these folks? Bernice?
Yeah, I don't know if this is better to bring up in executive session. You can let me know. So I know Mr. Ricci mentioned that he does not know the thinking behind the reason to list commercial camps in the ordinance, along with a lot of other things like airports and slaughterhouses and trucking terminals. Is that anything that Mr. Bridger or Mr. Lesko knows anything about, the history behind that?
Well, you might be looking at the conditional use table of the former township, which then it lists all the it has asterisks for each of those uses. I don't know off the top of my head if the slaughterhouses and airports and whatever else
Those are prohibited uses, Justin, I believe.
Right, and commercial camps, right?
See, the commercial camp is listed under a prohibited use. That's why it's a D1 use variance. So, and I think your question is, why is it in the same category as a slaughterhouse? And
Yeah, it's hard to understand how these are all lumped together. I can see the connection between many of them, but any
Ms.
insight?
Chen, if I may, unless Mr. Lesko or Mr. Bridger wants to jump in, and I think what Mr. Ricci also kind of alluded to, even saying he didn't know why, a commercial camp is a pretty vague term. And I think what Mr. Lesko was concerned about with his line of questioning as to really drilling down on the operations and the number of cars and the number of campers is because commercial camp, it can be, you know, the 80 kids we're talking about, or in theory, not that I've seen one of these, but it could be 1,000 kids. It could be 1,500 kids. It could be a really large camp whereby I would imagine, as an attorney, but I would imagine that the municipality of Princeton wants to maintain some control over that to ensure that what doesn't happen is Mr. Bridger gets an application for a permit for a camp without specification and detail, and there could be 1,500 campers there, and he has no ability to say, I think this should have an additional check and balance. So I think there is some merit to saying, let's hold off for a second. Let's send things like this to the board, give them the ability to review it and make an intelligent decision. That would be my guess. But again, I'm just a lowly attorney.
All right, Mr. Lesko, Derek, do you have anything else to add to that?
I don't think I agree with that. I think, you know, most of those uses within that list have nuisances associated with them. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the commercial camp was, nuisance might be. Mr. Wine might be onto something with, if it is a Boy Scout camp where 20,000 Boy Scouts are coming to every summer, or, that's not a good example because that wouldn't be commercial, but, if it's that type of camp, maybe, but, I think it's suggested or explicitly stated that the municipality prohibited those uses in all districts and doesn't want them.
I also think that even if a not-for-profit camp went to a site that was that was an approved conditional use, they're still going before a board. If this was a case where a conditional use that permitted a not-for-profit camp, which it doesn't at this site, if it was permitted, they'd still be filing a site plan and a conditional use application, and they would still have to go to the planning board. So I think that's what this board has to grapple with. I don't think we're going to get the answer to why camps are for profit are not permitted. We can guess at it, but what the board can do is take the information that's been given by the applicant, the number of students at PDS in the summer, the number of kids in this camp, and there's going to be conditions. The findings are going to, if it's approved, it's going to limit the kids at this camp to a certain number. It's going to detail when the kids are dropped off. It's going to detail how long the camp is. So, I mean, these are parameters that can give the board, some control and some comfort over the future use that's proposed here. And then, and if you want to come back in a year, then as Harlan said, that's a good opportunity to see how it worked out. But that's what I have to offer on that.
All right, thank you, Derek. Any other questions of these? Mr. Vine, do you want to give a closing statement before we open it up to the public?
Yeah, so I was just going to ask if you'd prefer me to do that before or after the public. I know each.
You'll have an opportunity after the public to do it again.
So why don't I reserve at the risk of keeping the board twice?
All right. So we'll close this portion and open to the public. Claudia, do we have anybody in the public who would like to speak?
Yes, 1 second.
We have 2 attendees in the public. If either of you would like to speak, please raise your hand by hitting the button.
They have. So.
Okay, I don't see any hands being raised.
Excuse me, Chairman, Vice Chairman, there's Netta Bakal I see on the screen with her hand raised. She's been pulled over.
Yes, hi, I'm Netta Bakal.
Ms. Bakal, do you think you could turn on your video so we can see you?
Yes.
And then we need to swear
There
you
we
in.
are. Ms. McCall, we're going to swear you in. Do you swear or affirm any testimony you give this evening will be truthful?
Yes.
And if you're comfortable letting us know what your address is, or if not, if you can advise what community you reside in.
I live in Princeton on Adams Drive. I'm a faculty at Princeton University.
Okay.
I have my granddaughter will be visiting me this summer, and have registered her already in this camp to start this Monday. So what I would simply like to say as a member of this community, and for families who have kids in this community, that I strongly support having this camp here in the summer at PDS. My granddaughter went to the PDS summer camp last summer. She now would like to go, is registered to go to this Stephen Cates camp. It sounds like a wonderful camp. As parents, again, I'm not a professional planner or know about the zoning, but as parents, as families, these camps are a wonderful benefit to the community, for children, for parents and grandparents who work and want the kids to go here in the summer. And we don't even know which one is for profit, which one is not for profit. They all look and sound the same as long as they don't become huge. I don't see much problem with that. I would like strongly to support accepting this camp, at least for this summer. If you need more information for later, that's fine. But at least for this summer, it is really, seems to me, not reasonable to have 70 families or 80 families that are registered to start in a few days and are planning on that and don't have any other plans available at this time to just cancel the whole thing. That's just not reasonable for a small camp of 80 kids compared to the PDS camp, which is much larger. So I strongly support accepting it.
Thank you very much for your statements. Anybody else in the public want to make a statement? Claudia, do you see anyone?
No more hands.
Okay, in that case, we'll close the public portion and go to a closing argument by Mr. Vine.
Sure. So I'll be brief. I think everything that I wanted to say has been said over the course of last meeting and this meeting. It's no secret, it's no surprise. Obviously, we're before this board with jurisdiction because we are seeking a D1 use variance. For the camp use itself being a commercial camp, then there's the element of the for-profit language, which is written into your ordinance. But whichever way you slice it, we're here for a use variance under the D1 standard. There was extensive testimony at the last meeting by Mr. Martell regarding why he views this as an inherently beneficial use. I think, quite honestly, there are elements of inherently beneficial use to childcare over the course of the summer. Just because it's not a daycare, just because it's not a school, it has those similar elements. As somebody said earlier, there are 2 to 3 months of the year where parents don't really differentiate between what it's called on paper and what the SICA case or what the SICA test would say. Parents are interested in childcare. That's at the end of the day what this is. It's a benefit and it's necessary. But on the flip side, you also heard extensive testimony that started at last hearing and certainly was given in very great detail this evening as to the more standard and more typical Medici test for granting of a D1 use variance. Specifically, that the site is particularly suitable, which I think you heard about, and there was really, not much dispute from anybody in terms of you have a 75-acre childcare facility that is not using that facility for the exact time that a different childcare operation wants to come in and use it. It's hard for me to believe that there are many better or more suitable sites for this proposed use than a school. It just goes hand in hand. Where I live, most of the schools have some type of summer childcare program because it makes sense. They rent it out, they earn a little bit of money to help pay down their expenses and their costs, which includes maintenance throughout the summer anyways. And practically speaking, the facilities are set up. You have the classroom element, you have the outdoor element, you have the staff element, you have the drop-off element. It just makes sense. So I think a question was asked of Ms. Handeboat earlier, why this site? I think it's been fleshed out, but I think practically speaking, the school is simply an intelligent location for a camp during the summer. In addition to particular site suitability, as Mr. Ritchie went through, we have to show special reasons for granting of the relief sought. And that is done in this case through a showing of what's called the positive criteria, or how the application would advance purposes of the land use law. There were some questions about which purposes. I know there was a board member or two who questioned 1 or 2 of the purposes, but nevertheless, as Mr. Ritchie said when he opened, that really you just have to agree that it advances one of the purposes of the land use law. He presented 4. We'd appreciate if you agreed with all 4, but if you can find it in your hearts and minds to accept even one of those purposes of the land use law, be it the general welfare, the fact that there's ample and adequate availability of light, air, and open space, an appropriate use of land, whichever way you slice it, if you accept one of those arguments, then that is a satisfaction of the positive criteria under the municipal land use law. You also heard about the negative criteria. whether this camp use would represent a substantial detriment to the public good or a substantial impairment of the zone plan. I think utilizing what amounts to several classrooms and a small outdoor space on a 75-acre facility built to house and educate children, I don't think that there's really any substantial detriment. We didn't really hear of any substantial detriment. And again, the bar, as I said a few times, is substantial, not just detriment. So if there's a question about whether or not down the road there might be more campers, or even that the PDS camp itself might have more campers in future summers, that's something that can certainly be looked at. But as of now, I think it's been fleshed out that there's no substantial detriment to the public to allowing the child care use effectively to continue at this facility throughout the summer. And then the second prong, as Mr. Ritchie mentioned, is whether there's substantial impairment of the zone plan or the master plan. I think he rattled off a few specific items listed explicitly within your master plan that actually support a camp use at a school. But beyond that, it's also about whether there's an impairment of the zone plan. Everybody on this call scratched their heads as to why maybe this particular use is not permitted in this zone, in the municipality. And at the end of the day, as I believe it was Mr. Floyd who said, we can do this all day. We're never going to get, we're never going to have a clear answer as to why. But again, the bar being substantial impairment of the zone plan, I think if there was a substantial impairment of the zone plan, it would be a lot more evident in its use. We're not proposing any additional structures on the site. We're not proposing any buses on the site. We're not proposing any renovations to any of the facilities whatsoever. As you heard from Ms. Handebode, it's basically 2 temporary signs to provide direction to parents as they bring their children onto the site. And ultimately, I'll just sum by saying, looking at this, from a high level and looking at this for what it is, this is a proposed operation to ensure that kids have care and kids have a great time, honestly, during the summer. We want our kids to have a great time. I'm a young parent of 2 young children, and I'm sitting here this evening on a Zoom call, not at all as a negative to this board, but I didn't have a chance to do bedtime with my kids tonight. That's something that I value as a parent. What I love most about bedtime is hearing about my kids' days. And I think if Stephen Cates offers even the slightest bit of uniqueness and differentiation and service that perhaps other opportunities don't, speaking as a parent and not as a lawyer and not as a land use professional, that just seems like a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to bring to the people of Princeton. So with that, I think you heard in detail the legal argument, the positive and negative criteria, the site suitability. You heard about the operations. You heard about the conditions we're willing to impose. And while I indicated at the beginning this evening that I would like for this variance to be granted and run with the land as a variance typically is, at its core, what we really are looking to do is at least ensure that the kids that are ready and willing and able to start in the coming days have the ability to do so. So with that, Mr. Vice Chair, I would close my presentation. I again thank the board for their time 2 weeks ago, this evening, and for requesting all of the additional materials, because I do personally feel that while maybe not total clarity, a lot more clarity was given to this particular use at this particular site. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Board members, do you have any further questions for these witnesses before we go into executive session? Okay, seeing none, I close this session and we will now be in executive session. Comments, questions, motions? Any questions? Any motions? Anybody want to make a motion? Michael, you're
move that we approve this, but I'm not exactly, I'd like some help on how to frame it. I mean, it might be reasonable to say that we will do it for, I guess that's what I'd like to talk about a little bit, is whether we would want to give it a chance to see how it, you know, I don't really have a problem with it. I think there's a lot of good to come out of this, and having the question of, you know, the discussion about zip codes. I mean, it might be a good thing for kids to meet kids who live in Montgomery. You know, I don't think that it has to be all, you know, everyone in this town, you know, to make it a legitimate use. So I don't know whether I'm maybe starting a discussion a little bit more, and it looks like George, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, would you approve as a friendly amendment to that motion that it be granted for 1 year with the possibility of coming back for another year, or even extended for an extended period of time?
I'm going to step in just for one moment, because what I believe the applicant had proposed is that, I guess we would call this a temporary use variance. It would be approved to let them operate this summer. Some more structure could be lended by asking them to return to the board in early spring. If they want to continue at PDS, the board could keep jurisdiction of this application to make that easier for the applicant. And at that time, this is up to the board now. Review what any reported negative impacts. I don't know how broad you want to be with that. And at that time, the applicant could then request a permanent variance if they feel that there haven't been negative impacts, there haven't been traffic issues. So that's one way to structure it. I think, George, it's a little problematic to keep trying to extend this year by year. We're trying to frame this with a specific purpose to giving this applicant only something temporary right now, with the goal that before next summer, the status would be fully resolved. I know the board did that once before. Was it the Hunt School, Derek, or was it PDS? You're muted. The Hunt?
It was the temporary use at the Hunt School of the
Right.
Building that was not authorized
Yeah.
for the
Right.
medical.
So different circumstances,
Others.
somewhat the same concept in their case.
Okay,
It turned out that, you know, they stopped using it for that purpose, but, so that's one way it could be structured. Eve, I know it was your motion. And of course, then it would be subject to the testimony the applicant provided, 80 students max this summer, the proposed programming, the internal site circulation with the pickup and the drop-offs, the hours of operation, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I think they advised a 10-week program this summer. So that's one alternative. I guess the other is if a board member wants to propose it for permanent variance now, or deny it, but I'm not getting that sense from the board.
I would not be inclined at this point to grant a permanent status. I would be much more comfortable with doing what the applicant had proposed and what you've just outlined, Karen. I agree with the member of the public that spoke, who spoke so eloquently. I absolutely agree with her and wouldn't want to see her or any of the other parents stuck. I also have concerns that I don't know if we want to spend the time right now anticipating future needs, future growth of the camp, whether or not PDS will expand, how many students we're going to limit, how many cars we're going to limit, and all the other things that are involved that I think we would want to, as I understood Mr. Bridger's estate, we have the authority and the power to limit these things. I just don't know if I don't know if we should be doing it right now, legislating from the bench, as it were. So I think this warrants further investigation. I'd like to see how it works. And to me, that's the most practical solution.
thank you. Michael,
Yes, to be honest, I find it's unfortunate because the part of the code regarding this not being a permitted use or to not, and the nonprofit profit also problem puts this into a really limited, narrow corner regarding that part of the code. This isn't like a setback requirement 25 feet, but this is proposing 15, and we can work within that. This is a very black and white on that subject. If we vote for this, we are basically, in my mind, voting against the printed code that gives us no real out. It's either one or the other. That being said, I think where this really belongs, even though it's such a small part of the code, is with council and changing the zoning. And with that being said, I was thinking, if this is approved on a temporary basis, do I want it coming back to us again when I don't think it should really be here? I'd rather it be a condition that if we approve it temporarily or for 1 year, that they start tomorrow petitioning for a zoning change that would make this legal. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
I like what Michael just said.
Okay. Denise?
Yeah, I mean, there's enough questions around why these things are in the ordinance that we're kind of, we'll be guessing and coming up with all these criteria based on, what. So I completely support the temporary use variance for all the reasons that have already been put out there. And I think that makes sense to try to get council to take a closer look at this as part of the ordinance.
Okay.
Would we make that a condition of any future, that it would have to change? I mean, I think we don't even know why, if it came to us, if it's so black and white, then how, I think things come to us because it's a gray area. So I do think it's something that ought to be looked at, but I would hesitate to make it conditional that we wouldn't even consider it another time. I would hate to.
Well, I'm not proposing that. I understand that it may come across to you like that. But no, I just meant that they go to council first. I think they have the right to come back if we only give it a 1 year
Okay.
to
Okay.
apply for a variance anyway. There's always a right to apply for a variance.
Right.
But my condition would be that they document an effort to get to council to change that.
Okay. I would support a temporary, but I don't have a problem with the permanent. That's what we're here for. We grant variances. That's why we do it. I don't see any question about traffic, any of that, only in relation to, we have no idea what other camps are going on in this community. Princeton University has camps all summer long that attract people and cars and drivers, and we don't have any regulations about those or any concerns about it. Even PDS has camps that we don't know anything about. And we don't know whether they have 30 people or 50 people or 150 or 300 people. So I'm not as concerned about the size of this one or the impact on traffic or any of that. I am concerned about the for-profit, but on the other hand, that's sort of, in my estimation, between PDS and these folks. PDS is going to be making some money from this, which is going to support their endeavors to be an educational institution. So, like I said, I would support a temporary. I'm not going to vote against the temporary, but I think we could grant the whole thing too, and it without it, that's what we're here for. So we do have a motion. Eve, you presented a motion,
Right.
and that has been somewhat amended by Karen. And do we have a second? We could ask Karen to repeat what she thinks is.
Sure. So if the motion is to grant a temporary use variance to allow Stephen Cates to operate this summer, it would be subject to the testimony they provided and the exhibits, the maximum of 80 students, the proposed programming, the internal site circulation with the pickup and the drop off, hours of operation 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and a camp season of 10 weeks. In order, if they wish to continue that use beyond this summer, board could keep jurisdiction of this and have them come back in the early spring. At that time, if there were concerns about negative impacts, they could be reviewed with the board. Applicant could provide additional testimony, and at that time, the applicant could then request a permanent approval if that's what they are seeking. They're also, of course, subject to any other third-party approvals, such as their state license, which I know they're aware of. In terms of asking the applicant to approach the governing body, certainly I tend to agree that making that a condition is a little problematic because,
Yes.
but simply if you want them to make a good faith effort to reach out to say, is there any possibility that you may change the zoning now? Don't make this distinction. It would be, much appreciated. So that's my suggestion about how to frame the motion. And of course, I don't know if there's anything else that anybody else would like to add to that.
Karen,
Derek, wait a minute, Derek.
I was just saying Justin had his hand raised.
Oh, I
Oh.
didn't see, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
yeah. Is there any need for a condition regarding the timeline? I know the applicant has said that they need their approval prior to getting their license to begin to operate. Of course, the resolution isn't going to be voted on until the 26th.
That's correct, Justin. I think probably that the zoning officer could provide written confirmation to whichever agency needs it, indicating that it was approved tonight, that they can operate this summer, which is, I think, of most interest to the state in terms of giving them their license. And that should, I think, resolve their situation. And as far as beginning operation, it's true that there is, with any variance, a 45-day appeal period, meaning anybody who wants to object has 45 days to file a lawsuit and object. In this case, given the fact that the camp is not going to be operating very long, I think they could operate at their own risk. Other developers have done that. The zoning officers made clear, if you want to move ahead, you can, but that's at your risk. And some developers have done that because they need to move and they're not particularly worried about anybody filing a challenge. So I think that would address that. And really, under these circumstances, I'm not sure what else could be done, Justin. We can't approve a resolution tonight, but it is, if this motion passes, they will get their approval. tonight.
Okay. I'm still
I
not.
would second Karen's motion. I would second, if Eve accepts Karen's version, then I would second Karen's version of Eve's.
Okay. I have a question though. At the end of the summer, what are we going to be looking for to see whether we're going to give this a permanent?
Well, that's a
housing
good
or not?
question. I mean, the motion
Yeah.
as framed would have them come in the early spring back to the board. And it's a good question. Are you looking for what information about how the site circulation worked? Are you looking for, I suspect if traffic was queued up every single day, you might hear about that. But otherwise, I would imagine that unless impacts have been raised with staff, you will hear from the applicant as to whether they're aware of any difficulties that arose. I assume if they have another lease with PDS, PDS was happy with the operation, but it's a good question. It's a good
Michael?
question in terms of what it is you want from them.
Well, you know, when we have people that apply for variances on residential properties, oftentimes they ask their neighbors whether they would be able to purchase land or do other things. It would be very interesting if the applicant were to ask the legislative body for clarification of the nonprofit versus profit usage and see whether it can be changed. If it turns out that the legislative body then either does not respond or chooses not to change the legislation, I think that could be helpful. So I don't think that should be part of our resolution, insisting that it be done. I do think that it would be wise for the applicant to do it.
Michael?
I mean, the applicant is well represented here tonight, so they're hearing that. And I'm sure they will take that into account and decide if they want to continue operation at PDS.
Karen, let me get to Michael. He's been having his hand up for a while.
Yeah, I could go with Karen's advice that require them to go back is not something to go to council is not something to do, but perhaps make a best effort, that type of language in a condition. Now, what happens, you know, half a year from now, whatever, or 3/4, what would we be looking for was the question that you posed, Steve.
Yeah.
I first and foremost will be looking for, if this turns out to present a bad precedent and there's a number 2, 3 of other applicants for similar that are for profit to utilize, you know, the same scenario of this. Because if that's the case, I think especially then the code needs to be approached for changing. I think we're, you know, if we're going to give a variance on a code and have questions about, you know, if it's the thing to do zoning wise, I hear a lot of social stuff, which I understand. Then that's what I would look for. And if it turns out it's a bad precedent or there's other applications following in, then rather than grant variances, you change the code if the town wants to do it.
I think we would also be just looking to see if our worst fears came true, of which I personally don't have any. I would
Yeah,
just,
you don't have any worst fears.
I don't.
well, I guess I could come up with some, but I think it's a stretch, really, to, I mean,
yeah,
it's a pretty benign request. I think that things could go wrong.
Well, they could go wrong, but on the other hand, they certainly meet a whole lot of the criteria that they set out to meet.
I agree.
Yeah, but I think that,
I agree
I
as well.
think that Michael is absolutely right, though. The code is the code. That, our job is not to, our job's to follow the code, guys. That's what we're supposed to do. If we can get guidance and if we can find out that they actually went to the legislative body didn't do anything, then maybe I would feel a little bit more comfortable in addressing it
Our
differently.
job is to evaluate the pluses and the minuses and grant variances if needed, and
Within the
deny-
bounds of the law, within the
deny
bounds
the
of the
variance.
law. And this law is quite clear,
But if it's ironclad, then why are we even talking about this tonight?
because right now, a lot of people are going to be stuck and we don't want our neighbors to be stuck, number
No,
one.
but why are we
Well,
even considering it to begin with if it's
We're getting way
ironclad?
off track here.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Only,
Yeah,
what
the
is,
only
what
question
is,
I have, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr.
what
Floyd.
is, so what is the motion about approaching council or not approaching council? Because that will determine how I vote.
Well, Michael, I think you had indicated you agree it shouldn't be a condition of
Yep.
this resolution. I guess, are you looking for Mr. Wine to advise whether his client will? make
No,
a
I
effort or-
kind of was very acceptable of your kind of alternative workaround, which would be stating best effort.
Okay, well,
That's all I was looking for now.
okay, all right.
To be clear, you know, if you don't want to do that, fine. I'm only one vote.
Okay.
Okay,
Fine, yeah.
any other comments, any questions? Claudia, will you take the roll?
So is it best efforts in there or not?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay.
yes.
Ms. Chen,
Yes.
Ms. Coulson,
Yes,
Mr. Floyd,
Yes.
Mr. Shriver,
Yes,
Mr. Tenenbaum,
Yes.
Mr. Stein.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Have a good evening.
I would recommend to you come back before the spring, though.
That's my full intention is to do exactly that.
All right, thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Thank you,
you all.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
That ends this meeting. Thank you. We will have our regularly
Yeah.
scheduled meeting. Any other comments? Meeting. The meeting's
No.
still being recorded, so
Uh,
Okay, have a good